Hello, everyone. My name is Maziar, and I am one of the instructors of the course JBI-010, Programming for Data Science. You have recently learned about some Python concepts, namely Docstring, Doctest, and PyTest. We noticed that there might be some confusions for some of you on how to differentiate comments from Docstrings and PyTests from Doctests. In this video, I would like to share some more information about these concepts via an example. In this example, we are required to define a function called hit detection. This function is to detect if a point hits a circle or not. This function is looking for 5 floating point numbers, all as input arguments. These 5 points represent the x and y coordinate of the center of the circle, the radius of the circle, and the x and y coordinates of the points. We assume that all input arguments are floating point numbers. So you don't need to check for that. You don't need to check whether the input values are floating point numbers or something else, because we assume that all of them are floating point numbers. But be careful, the radius of the circle cannot be a negative point, so you need to check for that. This function does not return anything, but it prints if the point hits the circle and when it does not. Let me come up with a question here, which is, how would you solve this programming problem? Usually you start with defining the function, which we did here, then check for a negative radius, which we did it here, and then to find out whether the point hits the circle or not, you need to first check the distance between the center of the circle and the point, which we did it here. If the distance between the center of the circle and the point is less than or equal to the radius of the circle, it means that the point hits the circle. And if it's not, it means that the point does not hit the circle. You can see that in the first solution here that I highlighted, we write comments to explain part of the code which can be difficult for others to understand, and also for us when we come back to our code later to improve it, for example. But let me ask my second question here. Is writing comments enough to program a readable program? To provide a readable program? You might say yes, but how about when we have a bigger program with multiple functions? In that case, we might need to go through all functions and read the code and comments which is written in their body to understand their functionalities. Is that what we want really? Of course not, because it's time consuming. Actually, we use functions to divide our program into smaller chunks, and then we can program those smaller chunks and reuse them in different parts of our program. So functions are there to make our programming life easier, but not harder. So we should look for a solution that if someone else look at our code, or we look at our code ourselves later, for example, as we said, when we want to improve our code, then we can understand the behavior of a function without going through the code which is written in the body of this function line by line. This is the time that we can take advantage of Docstring. This is the time that Docstring comes to the table to help us to make our programming life even easier. Docstring contains 4 main parts, which I would like to explain them using our example. In our example, in our heat detection function, we can provide a docstring that the first part of it is a short explanation of a behavior of the function. So in this case, I can explain the behavior of heat detection function with detects if a given point hits a circle or not. Make sure that the last part, the last character of the explanation of the behavior of your function is a full stop. The second part of a docstring is the assumptions that we have made. So in our example, we have made one assumption, which is all input arguments are floating point numbers. The third part of a docstring would be the parameters that we pass to the function. For example, in heat detection function, we pass 5 input values. The first 2 are the X and Y coordinates of the center of the circle. The third one is the radius of the circle. And the last 2 are the X and Y coordinates of the points. So we have also the fourth part, which is all about the return value of this function or of a function. In this case, in heat detection function, the return value is none because we actually do not return anything. This function does not return anything, but it just prints something in the output. So the return value can be identified by it does not return anything, but it prints a sentence. Or I can totally remove this. But for the sake of demonstration, I will just keep it there. So later on, when you want to have a look at it, so you can have this return also. Okay. So in conclusion, I would say that having a look at docstring in a function, we should be able to understand what the function does without going through the body of the function and read its code and comments line by line. The second part of this video is all about testing. Testing is an important part of programming. Even before you start writing the code, you need to come up with some test cases that at the end you can test your program to check, to make sure that your program works fine or not. For example, for the heat detection function, for our example, we can provide 6 test cases. The first one is when the point hits the circle. The second one is when the point does not hit the circle. The third one is when we have an invalid input. The fourth one is when the circle, the point hits the border of the circle. The fifth one is when we have a negative coordinates, either for the center of the circle or for the point itself. And the last one is when the circle is a point. So when it comes to testing, we have different options to test our program. First option is manual testing. For example, I can just test my function, heat detection function, with some values as an input and check whether the output is correct or not. Here, I just run this code. And then here, I can just run it. And then it says that, okay, so the first one, when I call the heat detection function, including these input values, then it says that the point hits the circle. In the second call of the function, with provided input values. It says that it's an invalid input. It contains an invalid input, of course, because the radius of the circle, it's a negative number. And the last one, when I call for the third time, then it says that, okay, so the point does not hit the circle. Why? Because the distance between the point and the center of the circle is more than the radius of the circle. In order to have a more efficient way for testing and check the outputs of the function, we can provide doc tests. Why I would say doc tests are more efficient? Okay, so using doc tests, we can check the output of our function based on different test cases all in once. So this is the new way of testing heat detection function. Here I still have the explanation of behavior of this function, the assumptions that we have made at the beginning, all the parameters, and here I came up with the test cases. The first line of the test case, in this case, is the name of the function, which is heat detection, and the input values. And the second line of this test is the exact output that we expect our program to give, to print in the output. So, for example, if I just run this cell and then run this cell also to run all the test cases, you can see that all test cases are okay, except the last one. What it says that I am expecting such a thing and I got something else. Let's go back and have a look at it. So here I said that, okay, so the point hits the circle. Okay, fine. But how about this? What did I do here? Okay, so I put one extra space here. Let's check it again. And then you can see that the last one is okay now also. So what's the hint here? The hint is that the expected output that you write here should be exactly the same as what you have written in your program, in your code. Okay, so apart from manual testing and doc testing or doc tests, we have another way of testing. What is the third way of testing? Is PyTest, or in this case, IPyTest. And I need to say that IPyTest is a wrapper for PyTest to allow you to use it, to use PyTest in Jupyter notebooks. So let's go back to the function, which you have already seen that during the lecture in week 2, and it's called find. So what it does, it just finds the index value, the position of one character of one letter into in a string. So let's move on. In this case, if I run this code, this cell, so it says that, okay, so it's 1, because yeah, of course, so the index, the first index of A is 1, because D is in index 0, and A is index 1, so it gives 1 here. We can use IPyTest to test the functionality of find function and check the type hints for its output value. For that, I just import the PyTest and then import the IPyTest and then clean all previous tests, if any, And after that, I start configuring IPyTest. And after that, I can define all those functions that I can use them to test the find function. So one thing that you need to know is that these functions are all should be started with test. And then here you can, as I mentioned, you can check the functionality of the find function or the type hints for its return value. But let's have a look at our own function, the heat detection function. So here I try to do the same thing for heat detection function. If I run this cell, then you can see that, okay, so there is an error. There is an assertion error. What is happening? What does it mean? What's going on here? We cannot test our heat detection using IPyTest. But why? I will give you some seconds to think about that. So let me tell you why. We can use IPyTest to test a function which returns something. In this case, when we want to test find, because it returns something, it returns the index, or it returns -1 if it cannot find anything, then you can use IPyTest to check it. But in our own example, in the heat detection function, because it does not return anything and it just prints some sentences, you cannot use IPyTest to test it. And I would conclude that heat detection function does not return anything. So we cannot use IPyTest to check for its outputs or for the type hints for its outputs. So, but we can still use Doctest to check the outputs. I would say that this is the main difference between IPyTest, or one of the main differences between IPyTest and Doctest. I hope that you learn from this video, and if you have any question, please inform me or other instructors in the course. You can also find this file, this Jupyter Notebook file, under the file section in Canvas. You can go to the instruction, Vic2, and then here you go. You can download this instruction for Jupyter Notebook file. I hope that you learn and enjoy this video. Thank you.